Welcome back to another episode of The Political Life. And just had been predicted or joked about on our show that we may be back in Georgia doing a Groundhog Day of 2020. This is Jim O'Brien, your host of The Political Life. And today our guest is someone who has been on the show before. We're going back down to Georgia to talk to Howard Franklin. And Howard is very involved in Democratic campaigns in Georgia and a lobbyist in the state there. Has some new offices right down the street from the state capitol. But we had joked about on prior podcasts about having to, with Eric Tannenblatt of Denton's, about having to go back to possibly having a redo. And I kind of laughed. And sure enough, it turns out that is the case. And Howard reached out to me and said, yeah, you better brace yourself. I think with a libertarian candidate, we may not have either candidate get over 50%. And sure enough, it's happened. And we are right back where we were in 2020. Now, we still, it could be the exact same makeup. We still don't know at this point. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon. We don't know the outcome of Nevada and Arizona. So at this point, I think the Republicans in the U.S. Senate have 49. I think the Democrats have 48, if I remember correctly. We have those two left open, and then we have Georgia runoff, which is why we are having Howard Franklin on the podcast. Howard, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Jim. Always glad to be on.
Why don't we start, I was going to do it in the reverse order, but why don't we start with the U.S. Senate race? You're going to be having a runoff. It's in 4 weeks, which is a shorter time period than in the past. Clearly, the makeup of the Senate is going to drive so much of this race. What are you thinking today, and how are you feeling about the whole runoff situation? I guess for you, it's better than having.
Yeah, I mean, we should. No, it's a great question. And it's funny, you mentioned the runoff being shorter. This period is shorter because the last time we did this, just 2 years ago, we had two runoffs, if you might recall. We had state runoffs, which were 4 weeks. And then we had the longer period, 8 or 9 weeks for the federal. And a lot of folks thought that was wasteful and that we should sync up and make consistent the election date. So passed legislation to make that the case. And now we have a runoff 4 weeks from Tuesday's election date, which is December the 6th. So very astute, you observed that. And as you might imagine, very confusing 2 years ago when you had state candidates on one election date and then you had federal candidates on another election date. And that runoff, the one that lasted into 2021, is the one that gave us Senators Ossoff and Warnock. And as everyone knows, Senator Ossoff won a 6-year full term, and Senator Warnock finished an unexpired term from Johnny Isaacson. So this is why we're right back here 2 years later. If you're asking how I feel, the answer is probably tired, Jim, if I'm being honest. We just had a pretty hotly contested statewide election where all our constitutional officers are on the ballot, all 236 members of the Georgia General Assembly on the ballot, a number of other races and ballot initiatives and referenda on the ballot. We were involved in a bunch of them and came out on the right side more often than the left side, or the winning side and more often than the losing side is how I should put it. So we feel really good about that. But a 4-week sprint is going to marshal a lot of resource, a lot of attention, and Georgia's right back to being at the center of the universe yet again. I know my good friend Eric Tannenblatt mentioned this when he was on with you, and I feel like my email also said, hey, it's quite likely just because the Libertarian candidate, the third-party candidate, was able to pull off or siphon off about 2%. And that was enough to hold Raphael Warnock to 49 and change and Herschel Walker to 48 and change.
Just incredible. Incredible. Now, so a 4-week campaign, do we have mail-in voting? What does a 4-week campaign look like?
All the same features, just a much shorter period of time. In-person early voting is just a week as opposed to 3 weeks. Mail-in voting, I believe, just Wednesday went live, so you can request your ballot from the Secretary of State via mail-in right now, and the same rules apply. So if you mail in a ballot, it has to be received by 7 p.m. on election day. And then ditto for the drop boxes, which are only available thanks to Senate Bill 202, which passed after the Stop the Steal, the Big Lie, all that good stuff. Because of Senate Bill 202, now drop boxes only available during business hours for early voting election polling places. So, a lot of the same elements, but obviously a higher degree of difficulty, just marshaling the same resource and ginning up the energy. I know Senator Warnock had a press conference today at 1 o'clock in front of the John Lewis mural in downtown, just a stone's throw from where we are right now, and really just letting his supporters know we're back in it, because there was some confusion initially. I was at his election night party, and around 12 o'clock he came out and addressed the crowd, but he never said the word runoff. He said we might have to go a little further, might have to work a little bit longer. And so, just yesterday, kind of the pundit class and the media called it and said, hey, this race is officially going to a runoff. And I'm sure that Mr. Walker will also have some sort of a press announcement, calling his supporters back into the fray to fight for the Senate seat for the next 26 days.
So you mentioned the drop boxes are only available during business hours, and that was one of the changes that were made from the Bill 202. So prior to that, the drop boxes were available 24/7. Is that right? Yeah,
I think there were a couple. So there was more to it than that, but yes, they were closer to around the clock. I believe it was the same hours as a traditional voting day. So I think it was 7 until 7. So not 24 hours a day. There was closed caption or closed circuit cameras, et cetera. But yeah, Senate Bill 202 closed that opportunity. And as you know, so much of the expanded access to the ballot really came because of the pandemic and folks, wanting to safeguard their health, the immunocompromised, et cetera. So, totally understand some of these things. I'm not making a big issue of the hourly or the availability. Although I will say, for those who have to work a job where they have to physically show up and don't have the flexibility, it does make it a bit harder if you got it from 9 to 5 as opposed to 7 to 7.
And so I was just going to ask, the reasoning for that is that they have somebody monitoring the drop boxes? Is that the reason that it's only during business hours?
You'd have to ask the authors of Senate Bill 202 exactly the reasons. But I'll say this, I think it was really, it was under the banner of elections integrity, right? And whether or not anyone could tamper with or destroy or remove those drop boxes from one of those government locations. That was what we talked about as the bill was discussed and moved quickly through the General Assembly.
So obviously they're going to gear up their fundraising activities, almost immediately. They already have. Already
happening. I've already gotten emails and text messages, and I'm sure fundraisers will be on our phones in T-minus just a few minutes here.
I can only imagine. And, and I have to believe the number one issue is going to be control of the U.S. Senate, because the only thing that's going to be different in this election is going to be control of the U.S. Senate, because the candidates are well known. You're probably not going to learn anything else about either of the candidates in the next 4 weeks. And I would imagine that that's going to be kind of front and center in this short election.
Absolutely. And to your earlier point and very astute question, only if Republicans are able to block the Democrats in Nevada or Arizona will this even come down to this question, right? If Democrats can figure out a way to win 2, then Georgia is going to be icing on Democrats' cake. So that has factored into a lot of the discussions about who holds the advantage and whether or not Walker's coalition will remain intact if control of the Senate is no longer at issue.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. We were talking about that right before we went on air. If the Democrats win 2, they'll have 50 and they'll have control of the Senate, obviously with the vice president as a deciding vote, just like it is now. If the Republicans win 1 seat, either Nevada or Arizona, then the majority is clearly in play. If the Republicans win 2, then it's just like the Democrats winning too. It's not an issue because they already have the majority, and a very different race. If the Democrats or the Republicans win both Nevada and Arizona, the national press is just going to be hightailing it out of Georgia. They're going to have no interest.
I think it won't be the degree of interest that we've seen over the last 2 years, but I think Georgia's here to stay. I think we got some, very compelling characters in the Georgia delegation, the congressional delegation. They're going to continue to make news and continue to be on the front page. But you're right, for the next 26 days, this comes down to control of the Senate for sure.
So now, Howard, tell us a little bit. I think most people know that Governor Kemp won re-election. Tell us about the Georgia legislature and any changes there, or what the next session is going to look like.
Jim, where do I begin? So much change. So one, we had a tremendous amount, almost a mass exodus of members in the General Assembly. We had a number of folks decide to retire. We had a number of members decide to seek higher office. Most of them, could not be successful just based on the numbers. And of those folks who retired or sought higher office, I think we've got something like 20 chairs and vice chairs of committees who are no longer going to be serving in the General Assembly when they gavel in on Monday, January the 9th of 2023. So there's a tremendous institutional knowledge loss that's going to happen no matter what. Then you've got 55 or 56 brand new personalities, people who never served in state legislature. In most cases, probably have never served in any elected capacity because the state house is thought of as kind of, a gateway to elected service. So you got a ton of new folks who, few of us know very much about, who are going to come to the General Assembly with their own set of priorities, personalities, et cetera. But wait, there's more. Our long-serving Speaker of the House just announced last week that he will not be seeking another term as Speaker. And our Lieutenant Governor, so that's David Ralston, our Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Duncan, also decided not to seek re-election. So there will be new leaders in both chambers, both the House and the Senate. You add to that, you got a handful of new constitutional officers. And all I can say is we all are, buckling up for a wild ride when we gavel in January.
Wow. That is a lot of change. And what about the party, Democratic, Republican makeup of the legislature? Any major change there?
Not major change. I think Senate Democrats picked up one. House Democrats picked up two, I believe. And so, Democrats are inching toward, I won't call it parity, but something approaching parity. And you got to imagine that Governor Brian Kemp, having served in the state Senate, having served as the Secretary of State, and now returning for a second term as governor, will be a steadying hand. But there won't be many of them underneath that gold dome come January. So there will be some changes. I expect there will be some changes on the minority party as well in terms of leadership, who's guiding it and what the priorities might be. But that remains to be seen. We're going to start having elections for members of the General Assembly and their respective caucuses starting at the end of this week. Or I'm sorry, top of next week, rather.
And are there any issues in particular that you're going to be focused on in the coming session? Yeah,
there's quite a few. We're in this very strange, dare I say, post-pandemic space where, because of the Senate majority with Democrats, state coffers are flush. We have a more than $6 billion surplus at present. And the governor has been none too shy about calling out his priorities and sending hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars toward the things that he has campaigned on since he first announced his run back in 2018. So, the good news is that we're not paupers going, hopefully on the backside of the pandemic. We've got a lot of resource. There's been, as you know, and I know the state or the national media covered, we reopened the state relatively early along the spectrum of other states that were kind of coping with the pandemic. And the economy has continued to be robust. So in that regard, policymaking is always easier when you got a little bit of money in the bank. You can figure out how to underscore your priorities. But there are still some meaningful changes that are taking place. There's some long-held desires, like esports gaming, for instance, has come up quite a few times. And there's looking for a regulatory framework to capture some of those dollars in taxation, to make it legal because it's legal in so many other states, to continue to be legal, and to give the sports team owners another tool in their toolkit to engage their fan bases. There's also been a tremendous amount of interest in economic development and, assessing which incentives are really delivering the value proposition that they're oftentimes pitched alongside as, again, the post-pandemic economy continues to roar in Georgia. We've got a number of investments in the high-tech field. And, as you know, Georgia's called Transaction Alley for all of our fintech investment, but we're also getting into EV in a major way. We've got battery plants and car makers, vying for mega million and sometimes $1 billion incentives. And so that's something that's caught a lot of the attention of state lawmakers. And it's something that I think there'll be a little bit of fighting over. But I think the difficult part is we could talk about what we know there will be some appetite for, but the leaders of each chamber really are the safety valve on what gets through. The speaker's going to say what comes out of the House. The lieutenant governor's going to say what comes out of the Senate. And right now, we don't even know who the Speaker of the House is going to be, and we really haven't heard from the lieutenant governor kind of what his legislative priorities are. So we're all waiting with bated breath.
And Howard, your firm seems to be growing by leaps and bounds. Every time I turn around, you have someone new working there, an additional employee. Give us an update on your firm.
Yeah, we appreciate you calling that out. I mean, we're super excited. We've been virtual for a year and a half. And so we had offices before. They closed due to the pandemic. And funny enough, we've grown during that virtual period. So a lot of folks here, I know, Jim, you and I are just seeing each other over the camera, but for a lot of my colleagues, because of the COVID restrictions and the protocols of the Capitol, because we were watching a lot of the committee meetings online as opposed to going down to the rope line, a lot of folks don't know how large we've grown. We've got 14 folks now. We've got clients geographically from DC down to Florida, Texas over to Tennessee. So they're keeping us pretty busy. And I think, people are responding to, I think, what we've been able to build here. We're super excited to be Capitol adjacent and looking forward now that, as I mentioned before, backside of the pandemic and folks are getting together and conferences are reconvening. I'm headed out to Texas next week for a conference. So we're super excited about how it's all going. And even as Democrats inch toward parity, I'll say this, Jim, I mean, we've expanded such that we're a truly bipartisan firm. We've got members who've been in leadership in both parties, who've been in staff roles, state legislature, state agencies, and it's, people are responding to it. So all we can do is just keep showing up and doing good work.
Well, and you do a lot more than just lobbying, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We, I don't know if we've talked about this, but I started my career in trade PR, and we've got quite a few communications clients from here across the state and even outside the state of Georgia. We've also spent a great amount of time supporting real estate development, all sorts of things from land use, permitting, incentives, et cetera. And then, part of why I guess I get these invitations is because we do keep ear to the ground. We do still help a couple of our candidates. One of my dear friends actually just won election to the state Senate. We worked on his race. We ran a SPLOST this time around. We just kind of pick and choose where we can make some impact and not get ourselves in too much trouble. So we still got a toe dipped into the campaign world as well.
Well, Howard, always great to catch up with you. So glad to hear that your firm's doing so well and see your new offices there. Very much appreciate the update, and we will have to touch base either right before or right after the runoff election in a month.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. December 6th for all your Georgia listeners. But yeah, appreciate the invitation. Look forward to talking again soon.
December 6th. And for our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and of course, Twitter. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And you can also check us out at thepoliticallife.net and sign up for a newsletter there if you'd like. So anyways, we hope you all have a great week, and we will see you next Friday.